so my thesis is on looking for an interaction design approach to mitigating unconscious bias in the tech workplace. I like this quote: "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity," by Martin Luther King. So basically, wait, so go back to. Oh, you didn't. Thank you. So I'm going to define to you unconscious bias. I'll let Google explain it. If you can press play on here.
Of course.
What would the world look like if everybody were aware of the stereotypes that they have and the biases that they have? When we talk about unconscious bias, we're basically saying our worldview can actually exert an influence beyond our conscious awareness, and it creates ambiguity.
You go to an engineer who's built something extremely innovative, and you say, who do you think your user is? This is where I have the most fun. My name is TV Raman, and I led our work on Android accessibility for 3 years. Write down everything that you think you know about your user with respect to abilities, inabilities, special abilities, disabilities. Almost every assumption that you write down on that whiteboard about this is the user I think I'm building for is questionable, because our various unconscious biases define the boundaries you're unwilling to expand.
These biases, they're the shortcuts that our brain has created so that we can deal with the information that we process every single day.
Right when we see anyone, whether we think about it or not, we are implicitly, automatically making judgments about how warm and competent that person or thing is.
All humans need to make decisions, and so we fill in the blanks because our brains are wired to do that, and we fill in with things we don't know with, past experience. Oh, you pattern map to someone I think I should hire, so I'm going to hire you versus this person because they didn't map, because I can't fill in the blank because they don't look like me, or they're not from my same background, and so I can't see how they're going to make the jump.
Every single person is great at things that you may not expect them to be, but it's really hard for us to see that when we're so powerfully guided by the things we expect to be true in the world.
I grew up surrounded with this conversation about what you can't do and what you won't be able to do. My name's Enrico, and I'm an autistic software engineer. The first time I go through the performance review process, I was asked for 5 strengths. It was the first time that I had ever been prompted to think in that way about myself, and it was really a life-changing moment for me.
When we are working in our day-to-day jobs, we are still making judgments about the people around us, about the resumes we see, about the employees that we're trying to decide, whether to put them on teams or not.
People are very wedded to the idea that they can perceive something objectively, and statistically they're wrong, but it's hard. You become attached to this idea that you can assess something by looking at it.
These subtle assumptions we make about people can have lasting effects on who we're promoting, who we're hiring, who we're putting in leadership positions. We have the responsibility to understand the assumptions that we make and understand the errors that we make.
But it's not just for the collective good. If you take the time to understand more about this, there are things that you can implement for yourself that'll help you develop as a leader and to do your job even better.
It made me realize how often I have a very strong belief that is simply incorrect. When I look at one of these evaluation situations, the first question is, how can I eliminate the sources of potential bias and leave just the data so we can actually make better decisions?
If you're not conscious of the biases that you have, you're just not contributing at the level that you could, and you're not innovating at the level you could. And so your products won't be as good. Your results won't be as good.
When you think outside the box with respect to the assumptions you made about how somebody would use this wonderful thing you built, and when you sort of broaden that perspective as to who you change the world for, you build something even bigger.
So right now we're just going to go through some exercises just so you can feel what that actually looks like, and how we implement it. So, for example, when you look at, don't read this, what do you see?
Triangle. Bull.
Bull, a triangle. Does everybody else see triangles?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody not see triangles?
I'm seeing circles as well.
You're seeing circles as well? Okay, so there are actually no circles or triangles or stars on here. What you're doing is imposing your bias and connecting the dots, which is what our brain is wired to do, to make sense out of this with what things that we're normally used to seeing, what we're programmed to seeing, or what we think we value in shapes, which is triangles and stars and stuff. But this is actually Pac-Man shaped with just two-sided arrow kind of looking things. They're not connected at all, but we impose the way that they're connected because that's what we're trained to see. I'm like going to that first. Okay, so we look at the which, when you look at this, is another example of how we context shapes our perceptual biases. What color is darker, A or B?
One second, someone. This one is quite popular.
No, but this is the same color, right?
Yeah, they're the same color. Does anybody see? Can anybody see that's the same color?
No.
No. Okay, so what's the next slide?
Bang.
This is, if you go back and forth between, you'll see like this is the same color, this is one same color, showing that these two are actually exactly the same. What's happening is our bias, we're used to seeing shade and light, so it's doing that for us and saying, oh, this is what it is meant to look like, so we can make sense of it. So that's what we do on a daily basis with all the millions of information that comes into our sensory inputs. And this is how we output it into things that make sense to us. And it happens with the same way that we interact with people. So implicit bias refers to attitude stereotypes that affect our understanding and action decisions in an unconscious manner. This is different from doing it consciously. Like if I wanted to be a sexist and hate men, haha. And that I'm making a conscious decision to be discriminatory or have a bias against them. Versus I'm totally fine with men. I think men are great. But let's say I've had really bad interactions with men my whole life, so when I see a guy, I'm less likely to talk to him or be friendly to him if I were to see a girl. That is, I don't realize I'm doing it. It's unconscious behavior that is dictating or manifesting how I feel against different people based on my past experience. So identity triggers can be a whole host of things. What popular conversation is usually surrounded on race and gender, especially in the tech workplace, on how on experiencing unconscious bias, but it actually spans to all different types of physical characteristics, and which is what I want to try and cover, as many physical characteristics as possible. I don't want to narrow it down because I think it will better get to the heart of the issue of what's happening. So obviously all of us are guilty of it. Google explained it, how it works. It's just everyone might have different biases that are stronger to different degrees to another. We also internalize biases onto each other. So if there's a common bias that society has against me, like if I'm disabled, then I might internalize that bias and they say collectively the group thinks I can't do things. I might think I can't do things if I just rely on that information that's getting given to me. They also manifest in the way that we communicate to each other. Let's say, for example, if I see this woman, she tells me she's from Canada, I might be surprised because consciously I might think, oh, she's Muslim, she's probably from Arabic country or something like that.
Where's that make-believe t-shirt? Where's that make-believe t-shirt?
Yeah. So exactly. So I might ask her that, but what we don't realize is in so doing, we are microaggressive. We're saying this, it's unlikely for you to do this, and I'm surprised. And that makes that person feel like, oh, I must only fit in this narrative of this person because of my characteristics. It has an impact that is unseen. And this is hard to go to somebody, and if she's used to getting it on a daily basis, it'll have a continuous negative impact. And it's hard to report that or directly confront that because it sounds like it's fine. It doesn't sound like it's a big deal. But it actually does have a large impact. And sometimes it has a larger impact than somebody being blatantly discriminatory to someone. So, and this is described as brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults. This was defined in the 1970s by a Harvard School psychiatrist named Chester M. Pierce, who worked a lot with African Americans and who experienced that, and he witnessed that. Recently, there's another psychologist from Columbia who extended this. It's not only to people of color; it's also for gender, disabilities, sexual orientation, religion, religious affiliations. So that has expanded now. And this is the different terms that defines the different ways that people can accidentally make microaggressions to each other, which contributes to an unhealthy social environment. So, for example, one of the biggest highs is height. 60% of the corporate CEOs are over 6 feet tall in America, and yet only 14% of males are over 6'2". Or another one is, and these are unseen like height things. So if you're over 6'2" in America, it's like 3.9% of the male population, and yet they make up 40% of Fortune 500 CEOs. So it goes to show that we have a huge association with height and leadership. Which almost begs the question, because I think, remember, for when we were deciding who should be the course rep, it was between me and him. So there might have been a bias that was implemented in that whole discussion that we weren't aware of. So why the tech industry? Why do I want to focus on there? Recently, there's been a lot of discussions about diversity in the gap, and here's the numbers and what it looks like. The tech industry has this influence in the world, that the way that we're developing globally in the world right now, and it's having a huge global impact in changing the way we interact with each other and the technology that we use. So it's probably the most vital place for diversity to be present in terms of building products for people that enhance our everyday lives and our interactions with each other. This has a huge potential for it. Unfortunately, there's strong gaps that are kind of affecting that. And probably limiting how much we could be building or innovating at the rate we are now. So next slide. I'm just going to go through these. So why is diversity important? Obviously, there's been a lot of research that shows the benefits of diversity. There's a huge research that shows that by Scientific American that identity diversity among intelligent people on a team contributes more effectively to problem solving than a team comprising of the best performing intelligent people without diversity. Leaders who give diverse voices equal airtime are nearly twice as likely as others to unleash value-driven insights, and employees in a speak-up culture are 3.5 times more likely to contribute their full innovative potential. That was done by Harvard Business Review. Employees of firms with 2D diversity, two-dimensional, that means inherent diversity and something else I forgot. The other diversity, inherent diversity is physical characteristics, something that you're born with. The other diversity is your experiences that shaped your perception. And only over 70%, I think it was 78% of out of the 1,500 companies that were part of this research didn't have 2D diversity, and this is what they were missing out on. So it shows that if you have more diversity in your leadership, which is actually the most where the diversity gap is most inherent in Silicon Valley, then that means women are less likely to get their ideas endorsed. People of color are like 20 less likely, and LGBT qualifications are also less likely to get their ideas endorsed for activities if there's not representation of people like them in the leadership structure. And also it has negative impacts for people, which reduces morale, which lowers performance, which creates high turnover, which has economic costs, $64 billion every year, and that's how much it costs the economy to replace them based on discrimination and unfairness that they report. So is it necessary to diversify? Yes. There's been a lot of arguments like, oh, well, the supply is low. This is actually, in California, the workplace employee base of diversity. So you have, this is how much Hispanics you have, Black. I think this one, Asian, white, and male. So it's presenting so well. And this is what we actually have holding executive positions in California in correlation to what we have. And it's what we have in the top 10 largest Silicon Valley companies in terms of workers, the representation for that. So it doesn't really match, especially like the Hispanic is really underutilized. Entrepreneurs are obviously really small, especially in leadership structure, and it's highly grossed over to white and male, which will have long-term negative impacts if you're building for a community that's about to become a minority in 20 years. So yeah, which is according to 66. Anyway, so next. So here's the challenges to addressing unconscious bias. You see these words, it doesn't feel positive, right? But if companies know that there's this problem, it's really hard to address it if it arouses a lot of negative feelings. So let's just go rouse the negative. So I think the challenge of the interaction designer is to try how do we bridge this topic into this atmosphere to solve this problem in a way that feels good. So yeah, reactions to training forums, it can cause defensiveness and resentment, which can actually lead to further division within companies. Next. If you try to directly approach, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Ellen Powell, she just raised a case in February against one of the biggest venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, and she actually lost the case, but it was really monumental, that case, in terms of she was actually bringing up things that had to do with unconscious bias versus implicit bias, discrimination, and it caused a lot of a ripple through Silicon Valley in terms of the talks about what unconscious bias is. So how can I approach to help mitigate unconscious bias in the tech industry if those approaches are not considered effective? Empathy. That's the best way that directly correlates with the way that we'll have a bias against someone. The more that we can empathize with people different from us, the less of unconscious bias that we'll subject them to. And fortunately, we're hardwired to only empathize with people within our own identified groups and less likely to do it with others. So here's the tool that I found that I thought would be the greatest tool in terms of developing empathy for individuals, which is basically able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes or in their experiences, and that's virtual reality. Next. So right now, I think it was Harvard, I'm not sure who it was actually, I forgot the university that did the study where they had a whole bunch of, like, a white woman take this implicit bias test that Harvard created, where you can actually measure your own bias, and they showed how much bias they had towards black women. And then they went and took this virtual reality thing where they see themselves as a black woman in the mirror. And then after 5 minutes of being a black woman and then taking that implicit bias test again, it showed that their biases towards black women dramatically decreased, just because they were actually able to be in their shoes. Next. It's also been used for training. Military has been using VR for like the last 10 years in terms of training their soldiers to combat, and it's actually been proven very effective. So I think this is, in and of itself, showcases that you can train people on behavior using virtual reality. If the military is using it in the USA. It's also shown to have positive health effects for clients and also help to treat PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, by putting soldiers who've had traumatic stress disorders into the same environment that triggers those, and being able to work out their coping mechanisms with that, so that way when they're in the real world and they're faced with those same triggers, they won't react in such a strong way. Right now, the tech industry is going crazy over VR. It's supposed to be rolling out next year, and they predict this to be, Mark Zuckerberg predicts this to be the next big thing since mobile phone adoption. Machine learning is another opportunity because we have bias. We don't know what to look for in terms of when people are playing virtual reality. Machine learning is an opportunity of another tool that we can use to identify patterns in the way we make choices and decisions. So design approaches, obviously all this. I designed my first experience prototype 3D game using Unity. I just learned it in a week, and it was actually not that hard. And you can kind of build your own scenarios. So what I'm going to do next is identify high-risk scenarios in the workplace, like performance reviews where there's huge double standards for women and men and heights or whatever, or choosing leadership positions. Create games that help mitigate that, or maybe just kind of experiment with that, and then have people test trial it to get feedback on what it's like. And then, so these are some of the ideas that I've had in terms of some kind of exercises or games to create. So maybe one for targeting bias awareness, and there's just find 3 qualified candidates in a room of 10 with completely different physical characteristics, and you have 1 minute to do it, and then see who you approach, and whatever, and that kind of gives us information, all that kind of stuff, data measurement, scenarios, and where you can act it out, and and then so when you actually are in that scenario again, you won't contribute a bias towards whatever that you might have. And that's it. I think that's it. Thank you. Sorry.
On this first slide, lots of interesting stuff in your presentation. Unconscious bias in the tech workplace. My problem is the tech workplace. Do you mean, because it kind of reads like the tech industry's workplace, which is something very large and very, not how much access do we have to that? Or so, I'm not sure. I think maybe that thing might need focusing. So is it something that in the workplace generally, or is it in the creative workplace, or what kind of
I want it to be tech environment because I feel like something with engineers and that has to do with innovation and building products. Fortunately, I know that there is a Google, I think London is having their own Silicon Valley thing, so there is, and I am also going to go back home for a few weeks.
So that's it. If that's what you want and that's what you know, there are definitely places in London where you can go and get that. There are Bethel Green Ventures, you know, there are places you can do that. And if you've got stuff back home, that's cool. I think there was a lot of stuff about you telling us about unconscious bias, which was interesting. There was a list of design approaches. Right? And I think about the weighting between those two things, because if you're translating usefulness interaction design approaches to mitigating unconscious bias, that's a very straightforward and valuable question, actually. But it requires quite a good level of understanding about each of the design approaches, so you know how they could contribute or how you could utilise them to do it. But apart from that, it seemed pretty. The focus was good, and the kind of, you know, it's a very direct question to ask, one that can be tested conceptually and practically, actually. So in that sense, it's probably the best example I've seen of a question that tells me what you want to do. So.
And I mean, seeing that you are kind of looking at one specific industry, and you have you've chosen to look at design as a proper kind of problem-solving exercise. I'm wondering if it therefore then might make sense to find an environment, like one environment where you can use some of these, so that you're not kind of, you know, working in the abstract. And I agree, and I've said this to you before, I think that there is still a bias towards the unconscious bias, and design is currently still kind of not quite as explored. And I think, you know, imagine you find a company in London that agrees, you know, to be a kind of case study for you and your project here, and you obviously will need to think about how to approach them with this. But imagine you go there, and you're going there as an interaction designer, so you need to basically be able to talk that language there as fluently, at least as fluently, as an expert. When you go there, because that's what they're going to be looking for. Of course, you need to know the subject matter, and you've demonstrated this, but you also need to know your tools and your field.
Fortunately, I worked in that field, so you say everything.
No, but that's like saying, you know, in your presentation, it's currently.
And there's also, again, this is a third level of stuff that maybe it's too complicated to get into, but there's a potential that some of these interaction design methods have bias in them.
But
actually, that's worse. And then there's also I was watching that Google video, and there's a huge kind of their approach to design, which I think they've actually moved away from a bit. But there's an approach there which is, it's really data centric, right? And it treats people as data centric, and there's a huge bias in that. I think I'm quite uncomfortable.
I've written that down. It basically says data is the unbiased moment. Really?
So I interpret it as like they just want straight facts, like not. I think they're interpreting bias in terms of based on physical characteristics, which is I'm defining bias for this project, is based on human physical characteristics that might shape our perception. So when you have data that's just literally just numbers, there's no physical characteristics involved with that in terms of human. So it's you can commit biases in a different way. However, it's supposed to ideally ignore everything human about it and just focus on numbers. But you're that's a human bias to, like, you want to incorporate human into it. I mean, it depends on what they're
but I'm not saying this to make it a massive problem.
Yes.
But I'm saying, you remember we watched those Adam Curtis films? Think about those Adam Curtis films that we watched. We talked about ecosystems and this idea that everything can be measured and captured in a kind of non-biased way, and it's a kind of false idea that leads to kind of
thinking that
that leads to some pretty bad consequences actually. And I think that there is a Google's, they want, they're all about gathering data and then doing stuff with this data. And that is a particular worldview, and at a macro level, it entrenches power relationships in the world, it privileges certain kinds of knowledge in the world and certain types of approaches to human society. Right? And so there is a meta level of stuff that is, you know, if you're talking critically about this stuff, it might be worth having some kind of beat. I don't, you know, the thing is, actually, in a very bound thesis and project about doing what you want to do, it might actually not be that useful. It might just dig you into a bit of a hole.
It should be at least a paragraph that says, you know, that you're acutely aware of
these biases. And that's the whole idea of it, is to identify your bias, like, or being aware of it. So that's
system-centric thinking about human beings is problematic, and that you can have a critical discussion.
And then I guess my last point, when it then comes to you kind of making these things, you were talking about scenarios, and I think you just have to be careful not to become patronizing with this. I mean, you were approaching this by kind of initially saying, okay, you know, empathy might be one way forward, and also perhaps to kind of highlight some of the negative terminology, and also obviously realizing that if you use this terminology, you might scare away quite a lot of people who would benefit from getting involved in something like this. But then when you talked about possible scenarios, they were all about kind of highlighting when someone had biases, which is a bit, you know.
I think these are high-risk biases that impact decision-making, which is all we're trying to solve at the end of the day. Like, even forget feelings and being nice and stuff. Where are we making decisions, crucial decisions for the company, that our biases might have more influence versus what is actually good? Separating the two. And decision-making, so performance reviews are that, because essentially that worker that you're reviewing, their morale, you're influencing their morale, you're influencing the performance and the perception of themselves and how they contribute. So it might be important in that case to make sure, are we accidentally putting negative expectations, are we actually using double standards, where one trait from this person can be seen as negative and another simply because we don't identify that person to have these type of traits. And that's important.
But you also want people to participate in you know, your project, or you know, in those scenarios. And I guess if you make that patronizing, they're less likely to kind of willingly say, okay, you know, let's actually do something about our unconscious biases. Let's try and make them visible if they kind of feel like they're on a, you know, they're going to be judged right then. And do you see what I mean? So I guess there's also it's actually.
Oh, you think that it might be taken personally, like as a criticism?
But not even as a criticism, but just that working with people is difficult, and then telling people about things that, you know, if you tell someone they could have a bias.
Oh yes, exactly. That's and I think I thought I talked about it, like the reactions to people.
You do talk about it. And then the scenarios you kind of brought up, you weren't quite as sensible towards this as you were initially when you kind of set out your project.
Okay, I didn't think I was attacking. I never said it people, but like I'm focusing on the situations, not the people involved. When I was discussing it, I thought I made.
I mean, I only had a glance over it, and what I suggest is that on Thursday, when we're talking more about the kind of practice, we can perhaps go through them in a bit more detail.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's all it's all in the implementation of that stuff. It's not a problem, the idea, or the
exactly. It's how you deliver it. Yeah, exactly. Which is my design challenge in terms of how I approach this. Yeah.
I just have one question.
Yes.
Don't worry. I know you're clear with your mind and everything, but at one point, I don't know if she said you don't want to narrow it down, you want to elaborate on it. But knowing you write 5,000 words appetizer, right?
Yeah.
So how will you narrow it down? I mean, if she's going to just elaborate on it, it'll be just like an ocean. So what are you going to do at the end? What's going to happen?
What do you mean? Like I think it has to come in conjunction with. This is what it is. You have to educate people on what it is first, because not a lot of people know unconscious bias, and it has a lot of different interpretations, again. So it has to come with educating what it actually is, what it looks like, how deep. And then from there, I think it can be easily understood as, okay, it's not a personal thing. If you can make it, this is everybody. Everybody has bias. If you emphasize that, and that's what I thought I was trying to do that as well. You don't make it like, oh, I'm like, you don't induce those feelings of guilt and blah, 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 because this is something we all are prone to doing. It's just a matter of, look, this is an issue. We all have it. How do we fix it together in a way that's fun and doesn't have to be like dividing things?
So I'm assuming your answer will be your project work.
Exactly. So my project work should be able to approach this, to educate, to get people to want to and be involved without arousing those feelings. And if it arouses those feelings, then I failed, and I have to figure out where those flaws are and then fix that. And that's where, I guess that's my design approach, if that makes sense.
Partly it feels like you're going to be educating people about the way we do design.
Yeah.
With an awareness of unconscious bias.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be kind of prototyping some kind of new ways of doing things.
Yes, yeah.
That, so actually, if you break it down like that, it's quite, then each task is about how well you do it, how well it's designed. So, because I think, cultural probes is a good one, that actually having people in organisations work with cultural probes in a community, that would build empathy and awareness. So what does a bank holiday weekend look like for most of your employees if they're swapping kind of cameras that they've sent to people and stuff? Actually, that's a very straightforward way of handling that.
Yeah.
I was on that note. I'm trying to find this article about empathy and bullying, and this. There's a common idea that with bullying we should teach children how to stand up to bullies, but that you should kind of turn this on its head and say, and actually teach empathy in schools. There's an idea now to teach empathy in schools in the UK in order to combat bullying.
And actually, so this is the area where unconscious bias is being strategically tackled as education. So there was a big move to have positive black male role models in British schools, because that wanted, so the internalised unconscious bias, the biggest problem that black schoolboys face is lack of ambition, because they've internalised low expectations. Right? And so one of the ways that the UK has decided to deal with that is to hire more, to get more black men into positions of leadership in schools. So black boys can and can aspire beyond some of the things they currently aspire for. So those, and so there's a lot of work around unconscious bias in the education system. So that's probably a good place to look for.
And I'm trying to find this article. So I wasn't looking at.
Can I, in your case study, I'm assuming this will be one of your case study where you create a case and study, right?
Yeah.
How about you also? I don't know if it's an example or something, but like, because we're in a design college, I assume when I entered this college, I just see that everyone's not biased; they're quite open.
Yeah.
But as you start talking to different people, even though they're not biased, you can see the way they talk, they're biased and inclined to a particular subject.
That's unconscious bias.
Yeah, so what you can do is you can create the survey in which they don't have to write their name.
Yeah.
And then connect that survey to this, where you can see the differences where people, when they're put on the spot, how they react and how they react to a game where...
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what machine learning comes in, because I do want to try and take our human interpretation out of it and seeing if there's algorithms or something that we can create that can identify the patterns for us. We don't say, oh, we're looking for this. We let the machine say, this is the patterns that we're finding out in terms of the way that they're interacting with the different characters and people and the things. So, and then from there we can take the information we need, because then we might find other things that might have like X factors that we didn't think about that could actually contribute. It may not have been what we thought. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But yes. That's ideal. The machine learning aspect of it is supposed to capture that hopefully. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.